Black hotel maid answered, a call in Dutch, in front of a millionaire. Then he asked to see her. Naomi Mbecky's hands were deep in the sudsy basin of the penthouse kitchenette sink when the hotel room phone began to ring. The sound cut sharply through the hum of the air conditioner and the muffled sweep of her cloth against the marble counter. She froze. Staff weren't supposed to answer guest phones unless specifically asked, but she was alone, and the call was relentless. 3 rings, 4, 5. She wiped her hands on the edge of her navy apron and picked up the receiver, pressing it tentatively to her ear. Hello? Met we spreek? The voice on the other end was hurried, accented Dutch. Someone calling about a shipment arriving early, and something about customs papers. Naomi's reply came without thinking. Her Dutch was crisp, tinged with the faint melody of Afrikaans roots. Ja, ik begrijp het. De documenten kunnen in de lobby worden afgegeven. Ik zal ervoor zorgen dat ze veilig bij meneer terechtkomen. She gave clear directions, gently calming the caller until everything was arranged. What she didn't realize, until she hung up and turned, was that she wasn't alone anymore. A tall man with a weathered wool coat draped over one arm was standing just inside the doorway. His silver hair caught the morning light like fine threads of glass. He was watching her, not unkindly, but intently, like someone seeing a familiar landmark in an unexpected place. And as this story unfolds, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these stories. Post your location and local time in the comments below. Naomi's breath caught as she recognized him from the framed portraits in the hotel lobby. Adrian Volker, the eccentric millionaire who kept half the old canal houses from being turned into soulless hotels like this one. Before either could speak, another presence swept into the room. Naomi! Brigitte Van Loon's voice was as smooth and cold as the marble floor beneath their feet. Her tailored suit was immaculate, her blonde bun without a single hair astray. She glanced at Adrian with the polished smile of a diplomat, then turned to Naomi with eyes that could slice glass. Maid service is not authorized to take calls on behalf of guests. The call was urgent, Naomi began, but Brigitte cut her off. I'm sure you know a few memorized phrases to get by with tourists, she said lightly, as if explaining away an embarrassing moment. But let's leave guest matters to the trained staff. She leaned closer, dropping her voice into a hiss of Dutch. Naomi understood all too well. We must screen staff better to avoid humiliations like this. Heat flared in Naomi's cheeks, but she kept her head bowed. Adrian's gaze flickered between them, unreadable. Send her back later, he said finally, his voice low but carrying. Brigitte's smile tightened. I'll make sure everything you need is delivered. No, Adrian interrupted, his eyes still on Naomi. I'd like her to return. There was a beat of silence. Brigitte's jaw tensed, but she nodded, lips pressed thin. Of course. Naomi left the room with her cleaning cart, her heart hammering, not from fear alone, but from the strangeness of it. Guests didn't remember her name. They didn't request her. And yet, for reasons she couldn't guess, this man wanted to see her again. In the hallway, she caught her reflection in the gilded mirror. Scarf neat, apron spotless, face calm. But inside, something restless had begun to stir. Naomi tried to lose herself in the rhythm of her work that afternoon. Strip the bed, fold the sheets, polish the taps until they gleamed. But the memory of Adrian Volker's voice kept slipping between her thoughts. It wasn't just the fact that he had asked for her by name. It was the way he'd looked at her, as if her words in Dutch had cracked open some invisible door. By the time her supervisor relayed the message to go back to the penthouse, she'd almost convinced herself it had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps he only wanted more towels. Perhaps he'd confused her with someone else. But when she knocked softly on the suite door, Adrian himself answered. He was without his coat now, in a dark sweater that hung loosely on his frame. His expression was reserved but warm, like a man who wasn't in the habit of small talk but had decided to try. Come in, he said. I have something I'd like you to look at. Inside, the curtains were half drawn, letting the pale Dutch light spill across a low table. On it lay an envelope made brittle by age, and beside it, several sheets of carefully handwritten text in looping script. It's a diary, he explained. 17th century. I acquired it at an estate auction. I can read most of it, but some of the phrasing, the meaning slips in translation. You seem to have a good ear for the language. Naomi's instinct was to protest. She wasn't authorized for this kind of interaction, but the pull of the pages was too strong. She sat at the edge of the armchair and leaned over the diary, inhaling the faint smell of ink and dust. She began to read aloud, her voice soft but steady, shaping the old Dutch words into modern meaning without losing their poetry. Adrian watched her, not interrupting once. When she finished, there was a pause, and then a quiet. "Beautifully done. Where did you learn?" She hesitated. It had been years since she'd told anyone the truth. "I used to work as a literary translator in Cape Town. Afrikaans was my first bridge to Dutch. Then German, French, Hausa, English, of course." Adrian's brow furrowed slightly, as if weighing a question. "And now you clean rooms?" Naomi's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Life doesn't always keep us in the work we're suited for," before Adrian could respond. A sharp knock rattled the door. Brigitte stepped in without waiting, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome of disapproval. "Mr. Volker, is everything satisfactory?" Her gaze flicked to Naomi, lingering just long enough to convey that she did not belong here. "Yes," Adrian said simply. "She's been very helpful." Brigitte's eyes cooled. "Naomi, I'll need you in my office when you're finished." The walk to Brigitte's office felt like the slow tightening of a noose. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender polish and tension. Brigitte folded her hands on the desk. "I understand Mr. Volker asked for you," she began, her tone even but edged. "But our role is to provide service, not to seek attention. Engaging guests in this, personal way is inappropriate." "I didn't seek—" "One more instance of overstepping," Brigitte cut in, "and I'll have to recommend termination. Is that clear?" Naomi's fingers curled against her apron. "Yes, ma'am." She left with her head high, but her stomach nodded. She had done nothing wrong, yet the warning hung over her like a storm cloud. And somewhere above, in the penthouse suite, Adrian Volker was likely still reading the passage she had brought to life, unaware that his request might have just put her job in jeopardy. The week that followed felt heavier than usual for Naomi. Brigitte didn't need to bark orders. Her silence was sharper. She reassigned Naomi to the least desirable floors, the ones with rooms that smelled of stale smoke and drains that needed unclogging. Naomi endured it, keeping her head down, but the memory of the penthouse lingered. Not the luxury, she'd seen enough marble and chandeliers to be immune, but the feeling of being seen for something other than the number on her uniform badge. It was late Thursday afternoon when she saw Adrian again. She was pushing her cart toward the service elevator when the penthouse door opened and he stepped out, adjusting a scarf against the cold. "Naomi," he said with an easy familiarity that startled her. "Do you have a moment?" She glanced at her cart, then at the security camera overhead. "Just a minute." He handed her a small envelope. "It's a ticket. There's a private event in the ballroom on Saturday, charity auction. I'd like you to be there." Her brows knit. "I don't think staff are allowed at You won't be staff that evening," he said. "You'll be my guest." Naomi's fingers tightened around the envelope. Part of her wanted to refuse, to avoid another confrontation with Brigitte, but curiosity pulled stronger. She nodded once, tucking the ticket quickly into her apron before anyone saw. When Brigitte heard about the invitation, Naomi wasn't sure how, but gossip traveled fast. She summoned her into the office again. "You're attending as a guest?" Brigitte's tone dripped with disbelief, as if Naomi had claimed she was dining with the king. "He invited me himself," Naomi said, keeping her voice even. Brigitte leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "This is exactly what I warned you about. You're not here to charm wealthy men into—" Naomi's eyes snapped up. "Into what, exactly?" Brigitte's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Into thinking you belong in their circles." She leaned back, smile returning like a blade in silk. "Remember where you fit, Naomi. For your own good." Saturday came with winter lights spilling pale and cold over the city. Naomi dressed carefully in her best, navy dress, simple silver earrings, hair wrapped in a fresh scarf of deep indigo. She kept her coat buttoned tight until she stepped inside the hotel lobby, where the chandeliers cast everything in warm gold. Guests in gowns and tuxedos milled in the ballroom, their voices a low hum over the soft strains of a string quartet. Naomi felt the weight of curious glances. People trying to place her, to decide whether she was staff out of uniform or someone worth knowing. Then Adrian appeared at her side. "Perfect timing," he murmured. "I have a small favor to ask." He led her toward the front of the room, where a glass case held a delicate leather-bound book. "It's part of tonight's auction. I'd like you to read a passage aloud. The room should hear the words the way they were meant to be heard." Her pulse quickened. She could feel Brigitte's eyes from across the room, cold and assessing. "You don't have to," Adrian said quietly. "But I think you should." Naomi took a slow breath. "I will." The murmur of the crowd faded in her ears, replaced by the steady thud of her heartbeat. She didn't yet know it, but the moment she began to speak would be the moment everything shifted. For her, for Adrian, and for Brigitte. The auctioneer tapped the microphone, his voice booming over the polite chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our next bid, Mr. Adrian Volker has a special request." Heads turned toward Adrian as he stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on the glass case. "This diary," he began, "was written by a merchant's daughter in the late 17th century. It holds not only her private thoughts, but an intimate view of our city's history. I could read you a passage, but I'd rather it be heard in the voice of someone who understands its music." He turned to Naomi. "Naomi Mbeki." There was a flicker of confusion in the crowd. Naomi could feel it, a subtle tightening of curiosity. She stepped forward, her navy dress brushing against the hem of the stage. For a moment, the sight of so many expectant faces stole her breath. Then she looked down at the fragile pages in front of her, and the words came. The Dutch unfurled from her tongue in a low, steady current, each sentence flowing into the next. The room seemed to draw closer, leaning into the intimacy of the voice, the rhythm, tawashais, the soft weight of meaning. She translated as she went, English wrapping gently around Dutch like a warm coat around cold shoulders. "And in the morning, I opened the shutters to find the canal was frozen over, the light making diamonds out of the ice. I thought then that perhaps God himself had painted the day for us alone." When she finished, there was a beat of silence, then applause, rising and filling the high-ceilinged room until it became a wave. Naomi felt it wash over her, not like flattery, but like recognition. From the far side of the ballroom, Brigitte's expression was pale, brittle. She clapped twice, mechanically, her eyes fixed on Adrian. Adrian raised a hand for quiet. "I met Naomi because she answered a phone call, something she wasn't expected to do. But in doing so, she revealed a gift. If we are wise, we remember that brilliance doesn't always announce itself in boardrooms or universities. Sometimes it's polishing the very floor we walk on." The applause swelled again, this time with an edge of something more. Approval, agreement, even admiration. Naomi kept her chin steady, her pulse roaring in her ears. Somewhere in the crowd, a man in a tailored suit leaned toward her and said, "Do you do freelance translation work? I have archives in need of your skill." Another guest pressed a card into her hand, murmuring about a cultural heritage project in need of consultants. The air around her seemed to hum with possibility, with doors opening she hadn't dared to knock on in years. And all the while, Brigitte stood frozen at the back of the room, her authority slipping, her practiced smile cracking in the light of Naomi's moment. The ballroom did not return to its previous rhythm right away. Even after Naomi stepped away from the podium, small groups formed around her, asking questions, offering contacts, handing her embossed business cards. Some were collectors, others historians, and a few were simply curious guests enchanted by her voice. Adrian hovered nearby, not interfering, but ensuring she wasn't left stranded. "You're in demand," he said with a faint smile. "You may need a manager by the end of the evening." Naomi let out a soft laugh, still clutching the stack of cards in her hand. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Across the room, Brigitte kept moving between guests, her usual charm intact, but there was a stiffness to her shoulders. Naomi saw her approach the hotel's general manager, lean in and speak in hushed tones. The manager's gaze flicked toward Naomi, then back to Brigitte, his expression unreadable. Later, as servers cleared champagne flutes and the string quartet shifted to a slower melody, Adrian introduced Naomi to a small circle of influential guests. Among them was an older woman with striking silver earrings who ran a cultural preservation foundation. "Your translation was exquisite," the woman said. "We have handwritten materials from Dutch colonies in Africa. Would you be interested in consulting?" Naomi blinked, the weight of the offer settling in. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'd be honored." Not everyone's reaction was gracious. When Naomi stepped into the foyer for some air, she found Brigitte waiting there, her posture a perfect sculpture of control. "That little display," Brigitte began, "may have impressed Mr. Volker's friends, but it changes nothing about your position here." Naomi met her eyes. "You're right. My position here is temporary. I never plan to stay forever." For the first time, Brigitte's mask slipped, just slightly, a crack of surprise before she recovered. "Be careful, Naomi. People remember if you overreach. And people also remember if you underestimate them," Naomi replied softly. Inside, the auction continued. A painting sold for a staggering sum, followed by a rare sculpture. But Naomi's mind wasn't on the art anymore. Each conversation, each handshake. He felt like a step away from the anonymity she'd worn like armor for years. When the night ended, Adhering walked her to the lobby doors. "I imagine your supervisor will be unsettled," he said. "If she makes your work difficult, call me. I'm not in the habit of letting injustice slide." Naomi didn't promise anything. She only thanked him and stepped into the winter air, her breath curling like smoke in the cold. Something had shifted tonight, irrevocably. By Monday morning, the shift in the hotel's atmosphere was palpable. Some staff smiled at Naomi in quiet solidarity. Others looked away quickly, as if proximity to her sudden attention might be dangerous. The guests she passed in the corridors seemed to linger on her face a moment longer, as though trying to place her from the event. Brigitte, however, was unchanged, at least outwardly. Her voice was clipped, her instructions meticulous. Naomi was assigned to clean conference rooms instead of guest suites, a task meant to keep her out of sight. But something was different inside Naomi now. The warning and the petty reassignments no longer bit the way they once would have. She had possibilities in her pocket, literal business cards from people who valued her for her mind. Mid-morning, a message arrived from the general manager's office. Naomi was to come immediately. She entered to find the manager seated stiffly at his desk, Brigitte standing just behind him, arms folded. "Naomi," the manager began, "it's come to my attention that you've been approached for external work by guests of the hotel. While we encourage staff to form positive connections, we must ensure that any such arrangements don't interfere with your duties here." Before Naomi could speak, Brigitte cut in. "And of course, we have to question the appropriateness of these invitations. It's important that the reputation of the hotel remain intact." There was a knock at the door. Without waiting, Adhering Volker stepped in. "I'm afraid I must interrupt," he said, his tone polite but unyielding. "Naomi's conduct has been exemplary, and the invitations extended to her were at my request. If the hotel wishes to maintain my patronage, it will cease treating her as though she has committed some transgression." The manager's eyes widened. Brigitte's lips pressed into a line so thin it was almost invisible. Adhering continued. "In fact, I've already arranged for Naomi to consult on several translation projects for my foundation. Her schedule here will need to accommodate that." Silence hung for a beat. Then the manager nodded slowly. "Understood, Mr. Volker?" Naomi felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. She glanced at Brigitte, whose gaze had gone glassy with restrained fury. But behind that fury, Naomi thought she saw something else. A flicker of realization that the balance of power had shifted for good. When the meeting ended, Adhering walked with Naomi to the elevator. "They won't trouble you again," he said quietly. Naomi gave him a small, genuine smile. "I can handle trouble. But thank you." That evening, in the staff break room, two younger maids approached Naomi. One whispered, "We heard what happened. You made her look small. In front of him. In front of everyone." Naomi didn't gloat. She only said, "Sometimes you don't have to make someone small. You just have to stop letting them make you smaller." The following week unfolded like a slow exhale. Brigitte remained courteous but distant. Her authority now edged with caution whenever Naomi was in the room. The petty reassignments stopped. No more smoke-stained conference rooms. No more avoiding eye contact in the halls. Naomi's days were still filled with the quiet labor of the hotel, folding linens, scrubbing tiles, smoothing duvets until they were crisp as paper. But now there was something else threaded through the routine. The knowledge that she had a way out. Each evening, after her shift, she sat at her small kitchen table in her apartment overlooking the canal, working on translations Adrian's foundation sent her. Old letters, auction descriptions, archival notes from museums across Europe. Her fingers traced the words not just for meaning, but for the worlds they carried. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a thin envelope arrived in her mailbox, bearing Adrian's signature. Inside was a formal contract naming her as a cultural consultant for his acquisitions. Generous pay, flexible hours, the option to travel when needed. She read the letter twice, her throat tight, the rain streaking down the window like liquid silver. This was more than work, it was reclamation. The part of her life she thought she had buried under loss and necessity was suddenly breathing again. A few days later, Brigitte approached her in the service corridor. Her voice was measured, almost flat. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said. Naomi met her gaze. "Thank you." Bridget hesitated, then added, "I may have misjudged you." The pause was deliberate, as if the words cost her. "I hope your future endeavors bring you satisfaction." It wasn't warm, and it wasn't quite sincere, but it was an acknowledgement. Naomi inclined her head. "They will." That night, Naomi sat by her window, a cup of rooibos tea in her hands, watching the lamplight ripple across the canal. Somewhere in the city, another guest was probably dialing the front desk. Another maid was pushing a cart down the hallway. Life at the Veldman Grand would go on. But she was no longer just part of the background. She was building something that was hers alone. One word, one translation, one choice at a time. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what lay ahead without fear that it would be taken from her. The rain outside deepened into a steady, soothing rhythm. Naomi closed her eyes and listened. She was not invisible anymore.